Thank you for joining us. This is Beth Ponder at Train PD at TCAL. I'm going to be your host for today's session, joined by Krista Mosher on the TCAL team to help support this webinar. And we're joined by Ray Ann Springer with TWC, who's going to be our presenter.
Hi, my name is Ray Ann Springer, and I work for the Texas Workforce Commission AEL department. I'm new there, and this is my first presentation, so I'm going to ask that y'all be really easy with me. We're going to discuss the defects, that were released in Teams 5.8, which was moved to production on 9/30/2021. So they're already in production. You've probably already received the release notes or read the release notes for them. So this is going to kind of be an iteration of that, but it's going to allow you to kind of ask questions, and maybe I can bring a little more insight into it from an IT standpoint. So let's get started, everybody. A bit about me, because I am, as I said, new to this organization. Again, Ray Ann Springer. I'm a systems analyst. That's a new position with AEL. I'm actually going to be kind of the data gal. I come from the IT department in TWC, and I was the analyst for Teams. So I bring a wealth of experience with Teams, with Twist, for those of you who are familiar with it, the technical writing, requirements gathering, and data analysis. But as I've said, I'm only new to the program side of things since June 7th, 2021. Some other things about me: I'm not shy, I'm not nervous, but I speak really quickly and loudly and probably more casually than I should. So I ask your forbearance. I'm not an educator or a trainer. So this is kind of a new format for me. So again, please bear with me. And what little spare time I have: I love traveling, live music, hiking, not camping. I fully expect a massage and a martini when I get back from hiking. I read nothing but nonfiction. I love beaches, and I go to the gym 6 days a week because I'm in beast mode like that. Fun fact: I was born in Izmir, Turkey, and raised in Athens, Greece. And yeah, this is my dating profile photo. I put that there because although I come from IT, I'm not really tech savvy and could not figure out how to add my photo to my profile. So I didn't know how to let you take a look at me, so it didn't look like you were just sort of speaking to a disembodied voice, but this is me. So when I'm talking, you can just kind of imagine this person talking. Before we get into the meat of it, I wanted to give you some terminology and definitions, only because I am used to speaking in a particular way. I am used to speaking and writing in a IT-friendly format. So I may reference things or ideas or people that may be a little more technical than you're used to, or maybe not so much more technical as just maybe unfamiliar to you. So let's just go ahead and discuss this. The webinar here, again, is designed to give you detailed information about the defects that were released in Teams 5.8 on 9/30/2021. As I said, this release has already gone out. It's in production, and you should have already seen the changes there, and you should have seen the release notes, which usually go out at the same time as the release itself does. Moving on, what I want to state up front, guys, is I am a data girl. I am an IT girl. So we'll be discussing functionality only. We're not going to be discussing policy or performance because, quite frankly, I'm unfamiliar with both. TWC's application development and maintenance, AD&M Workforce Systems, are AEL's partners in IT, along with a designated database analyst, which we refer to as a DBA. So if you hear me refer to AD&M, I'm speaking to the IT part of the Teams program. That's where I came from originally. Just as information, ALM Octane, you'll probably hear me refer to Octane, is the software development lifecycle, or SDLC software, that we use to track defects. Defects are either bugs in the system, as in the code is not working the way it was designed to work, or an enhancement, meaning that it is something that's new to the system. It's a requested change because of policy, new policy, new performance, new government regs, updated functional changes, things like that. Generally, we refer to them as defects simply because that's the way Octane refers to them. So I will refer to them as defects, whether they're bugs or enhancements. Teams is a Microsoft SQL database, for those of you familiar with that, and its code is written in C++. Mentioning this only because I will probably refer to SQL here and there, because when I run queries against the database, I'm using SQL to do that. And I am going to be doing a lot more of that for AEL. I'm a big believer in data being the only way that you could possibly manage your programs. Effectively, or that you need data to run them effectively. So I will be doing a lot of work in reports and data analysis, and then running queries to help Mahalia and staff make decisions about how to proceed. SQL database is made up of tables, and tables are made up of columns. In a very broad sense, tables are pages and columns are fields. That's probably the easiest way for you to think about it. I have to say that because when I'm saying table, I may be thinking database. And when you hear me say table, you may be thinking of a grid on the page. So just so you know, there's potentially a dual meaning there, but they can be similar, or they're similar enough to be meaningful to us. An edit, I'm going to refer to edits over and over and over again, is software code for a business rule or requirement, i.e. birth date is required. That's an edit. An executable is a piece of code that requires teams to perform a specific task. For example, we have the progress calculator, EXE. This is the executable that determines or not whether you've had an MSG, whether you've had a gain. You have a pretest, it determines the pretest, the post-test. When there was a gain, it does all of that. Every time that you enter a test, every time there's saves to those pages, it's running this in the background. I may refer to that here and there, probably in future, maybe not so much today, but I'm not going to be going over these terms in every single presentation that I give, given that it's my first. I just wanted to throw a few ideas out there. A process is a code that affects a certain specific outcome. For example, we have a POP process. POP process is kind of like a little piece of software within the software. It performs a very specific task. It has a beginning and an end, and it's looking for an outcome. In the case of the POP process, it's looking to determine what your participation is, your date is, what your last service date is, and when that date becomes effective. So that is just a little bit of background. Just because if I throw those words around as I'm speaking later today, you'll kind of have a reference for what that is. Like I said, it's not something we're going to discuss every single time, but just to put that out there for y'all. Moving on, I want to give a brief overview of educational outcomes because Blanca has passed questions on to me, and Mahalia has passed a lot of questions on to me back when I worked in IT, but also now that I've been working here at AEL. And I just want to make sure that we all have a basic understanding about educational outcomes. I don't have screen prints in this presentation, and that is because we didn't make a lot of changes to the screens in this release or the pages in this release. But if you have dual monitors or you want to, what you can do is open up the release notes, which we'll be discussing each individual bug. And if you want to follow along, and there are graphics, I think, or at least maybe a small number of graphics in those release notes, and you can certainly refer to those. But educational outcomes, I am speaking of the educational outcomes page. It's a subpage within participant. It has 3 grids on it. It has the one for measurable skills gain. It has one for credentials, and it has one for educational enrollments. So educational outcomes, guys. One of the things that I need to make clear to everybody is educational outcomes it's a data entry form. That's all it is. It is a place for you to do the data entry of your MSGs, your credentials, and your education outcomes. Okay. It is just a storage place. It is a head data entry field. This is all it is. This is all it was ever intended to be. And I'm going to explain that a little bit further. It is not designed to match what you see on the Department of Operational Insights performance reports, nor should it be considered as performance data. I believe that there's a paragraph at the bottom of each grid that basically says that anything you enter is not considered, for lack of a better word, real in parentheses until DOI basically says it's real. Everything is a potential MSG or a potential credential or a potential EE until you see it in the numerator of DOI's performance reports. Okay. What it is, though, it's basically the universe of possibilities. The performance report numerators are created from this universe, from what is on the page, but it's not equal. But the numerators are not equal to the universe. The numerator is a subset of the universe being all of the data that you've entered in educational outcomes. An example of this would be the edits currently in educational outcomes do not require that a student has any contact hours at all for an EO, or I should say educational outcome, to be entered. And at the very least, we know that performance reports require the student to participate to even count to the numerator. So by virtue of that fact alone, we know that just because you can enter an MSG for someone, if they don't have any and if they don't have any contact errors, they're not even going to be considered. And I need you to kind of always think of it that way. This is just a data entry tool. Moving forward, teams. Right now, we're kind of in this situation where there is a little bit of tension between the fact that Teams was built some time ago and it's PY based, performance year based. However, we've since moved to working with POPs. So some of our performance measures are POP based. I would love to get everything to be POP based, but for whatever reason, the powers that be have stated that MSGs have to remain PY based and credentials and educational outcomes will be POP based. So we kind of have to work around that a little bit. Broadly speaking, the only requirement that a grant recipient has in order to enter an MSG is that they have a profile for the PY that the date achieved is in. That's it. You don't have to have contact hours. You don't have to have anything. You just have to have an open profile that the date achieved falls in. That's it. The only exception to this rule is type 1B, which we'll discuss a little bit later because that's in a separate bug. But basically, you can enter any MSG so long as you have an open profile. Easy enough. Credentials and educational enrollments, those are different. Credentials and educational enrollments are exit-based measures. This means that their performance is measured after the student exit his or her period of participation. Since Teams is still PY best, we have to work around this by requiring, and this is a little complex to write it out, that a credential date achieved or an EE start date has to be within a PY that the GR has a profile for, or in a PY up to 1 calendar year from the end date of the PY that the exit date is in. And that sounds ridiculously complicated even when I'm writing it. So I wanted to give you an example. If the participant's exit date is 8/31/2021, the end date of the PY that date achieved is in is 6/30/2022. 1 calendar year from 6/30/2022 is 6/30/2023. So the GR, the grant recipient, can enter a credential date achieved or EE start date through 6/30/2023. Those are the rules to add them in Teams. Again, this is not necessarily how performance measures it. and it's not an exact correlation. In the future, as we move educational outcomes, at least the credentials and the educational enrollments, to being POP-based, it will be 1 calendar year from the exit date itself. So you actually kind of have more time right now to get credit for this individual. The only exception to this rule is for HSE credentials, which we'll discuss later in a separate bug. That's just sort of a really brief overview of educational outcomes as it exists right now in the broadest sense. All right, moving on. First defect, and we have numbers within Octane, and that's how they're known to me. So I'm going to say it's defect 121042. What it is change the educational outcomes page to give multiple grant recipients credit for all educational outcomes. Okay. Previously, we only gave credit for MSG type 1A to multiple grant recipients. We've since changed that, and we are allowing all grant recipients that have an open profile for the date achieved, that the date achieved is in, to get credit for the MSG or the credential or the educational enrollment. Right now, we were only doing it for 1A. That was the only one where more than one grant recipient could get credit. So hopefully that will improve numbers at the grant recipient level for you. And we would display, and right now I'm speaking of prior, and we would display this grant recipient or grant recipients in the case of a type 1A in the grant recipient column, which was in each of the grids: MSG grid, credential grid, and educational enrollment grid. After Teams 5.8 was released, what we did was we removed the contact hours greater than 0 edit for MSG type 1A so that it'll be in line with all the other educational outcomes. For this particular instance, previous to 5.8, I mentioned that it was the only educational outcome that 2 grant recipients could get credit for. The one that data entered it did not have any contact hour requirements. But the second one, to piggyback on it, would have to have contact hours greater than 0. What we've done now is remove that edit for the second grant recipient for type 1A, because we are not requiring any contact hours to enter any educational outcome. And that is the same for all grant recipients, whether you actually entered the educational outcome or you are piggybacking on it because you also have an open profile. So that's the first thing we did. Then we changed it again, as I just said, to allow all grant recipients that have a profile within the PY to get credit, not just the grant recipient that opened it. So if you have an open profile, presumption is that you intend to serve the person as well as the grant recipient who actually did enter the educational outcome. Now, once again, if there are no contact hour requirements, none of this means it's going to be in your performance report numerators. It means that possibly, should you meet all the other requirements, then it will be in the performance report numerators. For instance, contact hours, whatever funding source requirements you have, and all the other rules that go into those things. And we hid the grant recipient column on the educational outcomes page. Used to be able to see the grant recipient for each of the grids on that page, but Mahalia has asked that we remove that because she wants that to be managed in the MSG management report. So you will not see the grant recipient, either the one that entered it or the one or ones that is piggyback on it. It can be more than one that gets credit You will not see them anymore on the educational outcomes page. It's just the raw data associated with the gain. And then all of the relevant information will be on the MSG management report. So do we have any questions about defect 121042? The one where we are giving all grant recipients with an open profile for the PY that the date achieved is in credit. It can be one or it can be multiple. It's not just the original grant recipient getting credit. Okay, the next defect 156008. This is where we modify the GED match process to insert an HSC credential. Grant recipients had pointed out to us that they were missing HSC credentials. They should have been added in the nightly GED match process, and they weren't. So when we took a look at that, we went ahead and fixed that for you. But that was what was happening prior. We were missing HSC credentials from the GED match process. After Teams 5.8, what we did was we removed all edits on HSC credentials. There is literally nothing that has to happen in order for an HSC credential to be inserted in the GED match process. Now, I'm not talking about a manually entered HSC credential that some of you may enter. I'm speaking of the one that comes and is laid down automatically through the nightly match process. There are no rules at all associated with that. It doesn't matter what the date achieved is, and it doesn't matter if there's a profile in the PY either before, during, or after the date achieved. If we get an HSC in the nightly match file from TEA, we're going to insert a HSC credential. The only rule being, which I did not write down, is it can't be before 1/1/2016 because we didn't measure credentials prior to that. That's a basic rule. But that is what we did there. Also, as a part of this, we did a data fix where we inserted any missing HSC credentials going all the way back to 1/1/2016. So it doesn't just fix it going forward, it goes back all the way to the beginning and inserts any credentials that we have received for any of the individual for that time period. So you should see an increase in your credentials. Again, and I state this over and over, just because we insert an HSC credential does not mean that it's going to count in the performance numerators. It simply means it will if it meets all of performance's criteria. But again, this should increase your numbers, as should restore any missing ones, and it should prevent the mishap from occurring in the future. Are there any questions about that?
Ray Ann, so we have a little love coming from Michelle. Thank you for the HSC credential match fix. Love it.
Wonderful. I'm happy to help.
And then we have a question from Suzanne. The text chase non-match report is still a hot mess. Will this be cleaned up so that we only see our grant recipient non-matches?
We have a defect in the system right now to not only make that more user-friendly, I should say more grant recipient friendly, but also to add a little bit of functionality to it. So yes, that is a defect in the system. We do know we need to work on it. It simply has to be prioritized along with all the other good stuff that we have out there. But yes, we are aware of it. And it is coming, and it is a defect.
And Suzanne replied, great, thank you. I'm sure that's a really big task.
Yes, it is. It's a big task. It's always really easy to, we'll just fix that. And if you know anything about working in IT, there is no such thing as we'll just fix that. Everything interfaces with everything else. And if you're not careful, you can fix one thing and break 6 others. So yes, it is a big task, but it is definitely something that we are aware of and that we know we need to fix and is on our radar. And if I could fix them all at one time, I would. I really would. Right. Guys. Moving on to the next one, if there are no more questions on these so far.
Nothing else so far.
Okay, going on. This is the big one. This is the one that's got a lot of moving parts here. Defect 108117, prevent users from entering educational enrollment, MSG type 1B for non-exiters. And actually that's kind of written awkwardly, and I need to apologize for that. The descriptions of the bugs that I have here are taken from our system, and we sort of write casually and for ourselves, and we kind of understand our own language. And I apologize because we were not always writing it for an audience. So prior to 5.8, Teams allowed users to enter an MSG type 1B, or it was automatically inserted if it was first entered as a PSE, educational enrollment. If the student had a profile for the PY that the data achieved was in. It's the same rule that we have for all MSGs. We didn't have any rules on it, so you could data enter it, or you could data enter a PSE and it would automatically get copied to MSG. And what we did was we did a lot of changes there. So after Teams 5.8, we have done several things. The first of which is we have disabled measurable skill gain type equals educational functional level gain, so you can no longer select it. That you've never been able to select the pre-post test gain because that is an automatic function that happens as a result of the progress calculator EXE. But you were able to enter, I think it's enrolled in post-secondary, and you can't do that now because you users cannot manually enter a type 1B, MSG type 1B anymore. So how do we get around this? What is our functionality? So we created a new process that's been created to automatically insert a type 1B MSG when the following conditions are met. And there are a lot of rules here, so it's a very specific enterprise. The last service date is in the PY that the student has a profile for. That's the first one. And the last service date, which we refer to as the LSD in-house, is in the PY that the student has a profile for. Okay, I think I wrote that twice actually. Last service is in the PY that the student has a profile for. Okay, I did, forgive me. And the date achieved is in the PY that the student has a profile for. And the date achieved is greater than the last service date. If there is more than one POP in the PY, and it's possible to have as many as 3 POPs within one PY, then the date achieved must be greater than the LSD of any POP within the PY. So as long as it's greater than one of them, it's good. And the exit date, which is the last service date plus 90 days, it's basically the date that your last service date matures and is considered a true exit, and any contact hours entered after that 90th day will start a brand new POP. Should be in the same PY as the last service date itself and the date achieved. So all of those conditions have to be met so that when you enter a PSE as an educational enrollment, for it to be entered also as an MSG, automatically entered, it has to meet all these conditions. Not the educational enrollment, but for it to be inserted as an MSG. This process should be run anytime that you add, a modify, or delete PSE, educational enrollment. So anytime that happens, we're looking at it, we're saying, okay, does the criteria, are all the criteria being met to add it as an MSG? And then if you already have it and you're just modifying it, we're going to say, oh, is the modifications that you made to the educational enrollment, is the MSG still good, or has something changed so that it's not good anymore? And if you delete the PSE educational enrollment, it's going to automatically delete the MSG educational enrollment. You cannot have one without the other. Also, anytime daily contact hours are added, modified, or deleted, the reason is because every time that you change your contact hours, you are potentially changing your last service date. And because the last service date is critical to how we calculate whether or not you're eligible to have an inserted MSG PSE, or excuse me, MSG type 1B, we're always, every time you make changes to contact hours, we're saying, is this still good or not? And if it's not good, or if anything's going to change, we will pop up an edit that is in contact hours that will let you know, hey, if you make changes here, this could happen. And those edits, I did not get into that granular level here in my presentation, but those edits are in the release notes that will tell you when you receive them. So speaking of contact hours, anytime you modify monthly contact hours, you add, modify, or delete, the same process is going to happen. We're going to make sure your MSG type 1B is still good. And then we're going to run this every single night after we run the POP process, because of course the POP process sets your exit date. That is your last service date plus 90 days. So it'll tell us whether your exit or flag is yes or no. So anytime any of these things happen, we're reviewing your MSG type 1B that was automatically inserted when you entered an educational enrollment PSE. And anytime it doesn't meet the criteria anymore, we're going to let you know. Okay, that is what happens there. That's a lot. And I know that might be a little bit confusing, but basically DOI has asked us to tighten up the rules for entering in type 1Bs. So of all the MSGs, which have those really loose rules that I discussed earlier, where all you had to do was have a profile for the PY that the data achieved is in, that applies to all MSGs except for type 1B, which I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So are there any questions here?
We do have a question from Susan. Does this fix only pertain to the current program year, or could it be used for MSG for a previous PY?
That's actually a good question. It's for all time. Let me rephrase that. It's really not relevant in that you cannot add MSGs, or MSGs will not be inserted for past program years. If you enter an educational enrollment today, you can only enter it if you had a, let's see, how do I say this? If you had a open profile now in the current year, so you'd have to have an open MSG. If you have an open MSG, if you have an open profile now, then yes, it would apply to now. Could you enter one? I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud here. There is never a situation where these rules are going to apply to an MSG retroactively, simply because there are rules in place that would prevent that for MSGs, and because you cannot do data entry for any prior PY. Does that make sense? And if you disagree, if you could give me a scenario, I could probably, I could answer it if I'm missing something here.
Susan said, yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, awesome. That was one. So that's kind of the biggest one. It has a lot of moving parts. And we talked a little bit earlier about, we need to fix the HSC non-match page, absolutely agree. But as you can see, in just something as small as this one type of educational outcome, there are a lot of rules to it. So just to give you an idea. There were some other defects released in this that don't require a lot of detail, but I wanted to just include them. We had some issues where staff readers, site readers, and readers were unable to create or update participant notes. We've since fixed that. So if you are a reader, you can now create and edit them just like everybody else can. You're bound by the same rules that everybody else is. So yay for that. There was an exception error happening in report. I don't have the details in front of me. I'm not sure what report is, but you've probably seen them many, many times. You sort of get this red error page that says there was an error submitting this request. We've since fixed that, and that should not be an issue anymore. You should not be seeing that in reports. And then there was another kind of error. There was a deadlock exception error that occurred when retrieving POP data, and we have fixed that one as well. And these weren't reported by all grant recipients, but anytime you get those errors, you should report them, but also know that anytime those errors occur, we get an email in IT that says this error occurred, this user was doing this at this date and this time. So we are usually aware of it, but let us know anyway, that you're experiencing those problems. It may be that we need to know your exact steps. We don't know exactly how you got to that page, so it's always helpful to report those. And we fix those pretty frequently, and this won't be the first exception error that you see, and it probably won't be the last either. But those are some of the smaller defects that we fixed in this release. Are there any questions about those?
We just had a clarification from Blanca that the exception error was happening in the POP report.
Thank you.
And then we have a question from Tiffany, and she says, this may be a question directed towards performance, but in regards to MSGs per program year, a training course that crosses PY years, a summer course from June to August, we can't enter their completion cert and gain that MSG in the PY that they began classes, but we would in the PY they completed.
I think that's correct. In the case, yes, if this is a post-secondary, this is a type 1B that you're speaking of, this training MSG. If we're speaking of the training 1B and the situation that I was speaking of in this defect here, there maybe we need to speak.
She says, yes, skills progression.
Okay, that's a workforce gain. That's not a MSG that I am referring to. Skills progression is not something, workforce gains is not something that we touched in this release. And in that it's unrelated to what we're talking about at this time. And not that it's not important. And if you have questions about it, I definitely ask you to submit them to, through the channels, but we did not make any changes to workforce gain MSGs in this release. So can I ask that you submit that question in the chat, and we will get an answer to it for you?
I grabbed that one, and then we do have Terry's chimed in that skills progression and credentials can be entered for students who are from the previous program year.
Cannot speak to that policy off the top of my head. I do not know. Can I put that in the questions?
Yes, I'll grab all that, and we can pass that on.
So looking ahead, speaking of a little bit what we were talking about workforce gains, Teams 5.81 doesn't have a release date yet. We were kind of targeting the end of October, but I'm thinking it's probably going to be closer to the week before Thanksgiving. And we have a few more educational outcome related defects in it. The first one is going to be to allow workplace literacy participants can receive a workforce MSG. So those individuals, not just individuals who are in training, will be able to get a 3, 4, or 5, which is the transcript report card, skills progression, and training milestone, I believe. So that is going to change so that more individuals can get those workforce measurable skill gains. What the rules are for that haven't been determined yet, but as far as I know, they're going to be exactly the same as the rules for training participants are, as to when you can enter them, if you have a profile in the, for the PY that the date achieved is in, you can get it. Now, as far as it being able to be gained in a year after I think one of you was saying that you could get skills progression in the PY after the individual had a profile. You cannot do that in Teams. There is no way for you to insert an MSG, type equals skills progression, whether or not you are in training right now, if you do not have an open profile for the date achieved. It has to be within that profile. I see where you could enter it as a credential, definitely, in whatever type of credential type that fits, but there is no way to enter that as an MSG. The edits simply will not allow that. And if you have been doing that, or if that's been a possibility, I am unaware of that. And as stated earlier, I'm happy to look into that. But I do not think that that can be done per the rules that exist in Teams. Now, whether you can do that per policy and that's something that needs to be changed, there's absolutely nothing to prevent us from revisiting that. But I am not aware of that now, and that is not how Teams works. I can say that. But what this defect will do will allow you to workplace literacy participants get an MS, workforce MSG, also, not just training participants. And then also, we will be modifying the MSG management report a bit. The biggest thing that we're going to be doing is currently the MSG management report gets the gets the PSE information from the educational enrollment table. And we need to change that to get it from the MSG table instead, because the MSG has tighter rules than the educational enrollment, and DOI has requested that change. So what you will basically see then is that when it is, you will see it differently. It'll look slightly different, have slightly different information. Not so much slightly different information, but it will be an MSG, not an EE. There are a lot of other changes that we're considering putting into the MSG management report. And just to kind of give you a little bit of heads up, because we are allowing more participants to get a workforce gain, we are thinking of adding, right now, when you see like gains, you see the information for the latest gain. So what was the last gain you got, or the most recent gain that you got? And what we're thinking of doing is in that report universe, or that extract, showing you every gain, not just the last gain. That's a lot of data, and it's a lot of rows that Mahalia feels that if this is a true management report, that it would probably be useful for you to see all of the gains for an individual within a given PY. So that is another change that we are looking at. There may be some others, and I'm going to ask you now if there are any changes that you think would make your reports more useful, your MSG management report, because I realize there are only a couple of reports that are useful to you in Teams. And there are a lot of reasons for that. We, of course, our rules have completely changed. So all of the way that we used to run reports aren't the way that we run reports. We also have DOI has what's called an EDW, an electronic data warehouse, where they are taking copies of our data. And then they are using software called Tableau to run reports from that data. The intention is to eventually give y'all access to this Tableau so that you can run the reports there and they don't need to be run in Teams. Unfortunately, that's been a really, really, really slow process. And from the demonstration that I was in recently, it doesn't give you information in the way that you most want to see it. I think one of the most asked questions in that presentation is, can you run this enrollment report at the provider level? And the answer was no, not at this time, because, and not in any offensive way, but DOIs only cares about the state and the grant recipient level. It really isn't as concerned with how you manage your programs at the local level. So we here, now that I'm in teams, think, data, we need to get you better reports, and we need to get you a whole lot more reports. So as we are looking to modify the MSG management report, if you have questions or suggestions, I would welcome them. But I need to get them quickly if they're to make this round of changes, because this is going to have to be, the analysis part of this is going to have to be closed out soon. But we are making some changes to that report. That's 5.81. The next one we've scheduled out 5.9 as well, looking for the end of the year, possibly January. We don't have a hard date yet, and it's possible that we may add additional defects or we may substitute some of these defects. But one of them is to display TWC's unemployment insurance tax wages in Teams. What that would be is a page. Every time you open the page, it would call to the UI tax wage system. It would say, show me the wages for this individual. It would populate the page with the wages, the actual tax wages, so that you can know when individuals were employed, when they had wages. It's view only. It's their data. It's not ours. There's nothing we can do to change it or fix it if you think it's wrong, but it will let you see exactly what DOI wages they're looking at when they're running their reports. There's some caveats to that, and I don't know that we want to get that detailed, but there are other wage sources that DOI uses in their reports. For example, wages from other states. However, because of confidentiality agreements, you cannot know that there are wages from other states, and you cannot know what those wages are. That's the way it has always worked. I don't have any answers to that, but just you will see UI's tax wages. That's going to be important because we're going to create a new post-exit measures management report. Yay! Basically, what this report is going to tell you is who your individual is, what their, all of their relevant POP information is, i.e. their participation date, their last service date. It's going to tell you what quarter their last service date is in, and then what their post-quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4 is. It's going to tell you whether or not those individuals have wages in those quarters. It's going to tell you whether or not those individuals have MSGs or credentials or educational enrollments within those quarters. And it's going to tell you whether or not there is supplemental employment. So you don't have UI wages, but you have some other kind of employment outcome recorded in Teams. It's going to show you all of that information as well. And it's going to allow you to run that, 30 days from the last service date, 60 days from the last service date, and when the last service date becomes mature and the exit flag is set to yes, so that you can start saying, hey, these people are coming up. We need to start working them. We need to know who we need to contact, because we need to know if they're working or if they're in school or, whatever situation they have. And it's basically a way for you to manage your exiters or your people who are coming up on being exited, so that you can get your outcomes reported, which is why we wanted the tax wages. Also making some changes to the staff roster report to make it more in line with the current rules as they are, to give you a little bit more information on it, to make it a little more meaningful than it is, and to sort of combine the functionality of the staff roster report. And there is another report that eludes me. It's the staff something or another. Staff without qualifications report. Basically giving you all of the information on one report. Making some changes to that. And then we are modifying the MSG and POP reports to be able to select multiple providers. That's something that's been mentioned over and over again, that you need that functionality. You can only run reports for one provider at a time. And so when you're running, you need to know what all your providers are doing. You have to run individual reports. that we know as well and are going to try to fix that as well. There are some other report related defects that we have out there that we may try to squeeze in. I know there is one about, believe it's the class roster. You can only export 25 people at a time. You want to be able to export more people. That's something that we have. We also have a lot of work that we need to do. Speaking of the text chase non-match, because it's somewhat related, we have a lot of work that we need to do with duplicate records. We are looking at a lot of ways to merge duplicate records. We're looking at a lot of ways for admin to be able to do it without having to go through a coder. And we have a defect in our GED match process that is accidentally, for lack of a better word, inserting duplicate SSNs and duplicate GED ID numbers into teams when we've done everything we can to prevent it on the front end. And it's happening. Most recently, we have this example with Isleta ISD and Gulf Coast. I believe it's Gulf Coast. Forgive me. I generally speak of WDAs when I should be speaking of grant recipients, but where we had that exact same thing happen and we had to untangle that and do a data fix so that we could get it fixed. That is another defect that we need to work. We need to get those fixed. Those will probably be records that end up on that text chase non-match page, which we need to add functionality for y'all to fix in the future. That's a lot of data, guys. There are so many defects. There's so many things that we can be doing. There's so many reports that we need to be create. And those are the reasons that I was brought on to here, was to give you better tools to manage your programs with. So as you take a look at what were some of the bugs that we're looking for in the future, if you have suggestions, comments, new report ideas, ways to enhance the existing reports, things, defects that you have that you haven't yet reported to us, the sooner you get that into us, the sooner that we can start looking at that and working those. I am just the biggest open door person. I truly believe in good data. I truly believe in good information. So I am happy to listen to anything, answer any questions, give any talks, do whatever. You can contact me at this information here. Are there any questions about kind of the defects that we're looking at going forward?
Well, we had a question that came up about basically what qualifies as a workforce MSG, which kind of goes on to the policy side of the house. And so there were some folks that were answering, and Veronica piped in and has referred us to the draft performance guide. Mm-hmm. And then let's see, and then somebody's asking about the draft performance guide. Mm-hmm. There is it hasn't been posted yet to the internet because it is in draft form. It did go out with the agenda for the biweekly provider call, but otherwise, Rayanne, that's all the questions I see. And I certainly appreciate your sharing all this information with us today. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon. If you have questions, go ahead and you can email Rayanne. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. Look forward to meeting with y'all at the next release.